Hi, everybody. We had a nice cool down with last week's episode, following the events of Sasuke and Sakura's missions respectively. Covering the Chunin exams specifically just feels a little small potatoes. However, I think all in all, it's super necessary for the continued focus I intend on having for the Konoha 12, or Triumphant 12. I had some weird writer's block this week. One of those things where I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but every time I sat down to write, I either got instant ADHD or I just couldn't figure out how to put the words on the page, like a caveman looking at a computer for the first time. I may as well have been mashing the keyboard with balled fists. It was like procrastination syndrome. It was very strange. Needless to say, it was very counterproductive for a few days, but when a week's all I got to prepare, a few days took away half my time. But it was there in the 11th hour that I finally found my way, and now we have an episode. Funny how that happens sometimes. I was looking forward to what was to come, and my brain said, nah. As a direct result of this writer's block, this episode isn't going to be very long. I don't have much to say for my intro because, well, I just want to get into it, and it's weird to say that because I don't have much for today, but I'm not cutting anything out, and I don't think it's a bad episode. Just as you've experienced before, if I feel like it's a really bad episode, I'm not going to air it. Like, comment below, and just have fun. Let's get into this episode. The gates of Konoha loomed ahead, standing tall beneath the afternoon sun. The village beyond was alive with energy, the air buzzing with excitement. Even before stepping inside, the distant hum of a gathered crowd was unmistakable. The Chunin exams were underway. Might Guy exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Ah, feels good to be home. Sasuke barely registered his words. His eyes scanned the streets as they passed through the gates, watching clusters of civilians and shinobi moving toward the central stadium. The exams always drew a massive audience. Tournaments alone were a spectacle no one wanted to miss. Kakashi, ever the composed one, took the lead. We'll drop these three off at the hospital and then report in. There will be plenty of time to root for our friends later. Sasuke remained silent. His thoughts lingered elsewhere. His were on the mission, on their escape, on that person and their opponents. Even the briefest flashes of what he had experienced glimpsing back at him still sat heavy in his mind, a puzzle missing too many pieces. After the hospital, they walked the familiar path to the Hokage's office. Each step was a reminder that they had made it back, that they had succeeded, yet the weight of their journey remained on their shoulders. Upon arrival, they quickly darted through the Hokage building to his office, stopping for a moment outside the door. Kakashi glanced over Might Guy and Sasuke before quickly nodding. Without a word, Kakashi led them inside. Minato stood, looking out of the village, a small stack of reports being scanned in his hands. He turned around as they entered, blue eyes sharp, yet betraying a glimmer of relief as he dropped the reports onto his desk. You made it back in one piece. Might Guy offered an exaggerated thumbs up. Not just back, but victorious! Minato's gaze shifted between them, his expression unreadable. The mission victorious? Kakashi cleared his throat to curb Guy's enthusiasm as he responded himself. Successful, yes. The Namikaze cousins were recovered and currently in the hospital receiving treatment. No casualties on our end. Minato nodded, exhaling slowly. Good, I knew sending you three was the right call, but I won't pretend that I wasn't concerned. Any challenge against that sage, Pain as he calls himself, is no small thing. We were careful, Kakashi assured, though we had a close call. Minato frowned. Explain? The room fell into a brief silence before Sasuke finally spoke. His voice was quiet but deliberate. He nearly caught us. Minato's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle shift, but one that spoke volumes. How? Sasuke glanced at Kakashi, who gave a small nod, permission to speak. Sasuke turned his focus back to Minato. We were forced to stop running. And with that, the three of them painted Minato a finer picture of their ultimate escape. Destruction was left in his wake. Buildings crumbled. Smoke curled into the cloudy sky, and the distant wails of sirens and shouting civilians mixed with the roar of returning thunder. The sage Pain, Nagato, was behind them, closing in fast and without a care for the destruction to his city or the wilds beyond. Sasuke sprinted alongside Kakashi and Might Guy, his breath ragged but controlled. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to keep moving. The weight of the rescued Namikaze cousins over their shoulders slowed them down big time. "We're not gonna outrun him forever," Sasuke shouted over the storm. "We're not outrunning him at all," Guy answered with surprising negativity. "We don't need to run forever, just long enough," Kakashi called back. His mind was working in overdrive, calculating options, but there weren't many. An explosion nearby and Sasuke could barely risk a glance. Nagato's rage was manifesting physically in sheer destruction. Trees nearby fell, exposing their positions more and more. The chase was also one of survival. "He's not letting up!" Might Guy grunted as he guarded the rear in their escape. His exuberance was completely absent. Sasuke risked a glance over his shoulder. Nagato was flying over the trees. Gravity bent to his will as he zipped across the forest. His presence was a storm where there was currently none, unrelenting, suffocating. "We need to disappear," Kakashi decided, seeing what Sasuke just had. "He will find us eventually as is, like a mountain lion tracking movement in the stillness." "Hide?" Sasuke repeated incredulously. "You think we can just vanish when he's specifically pursuing us?" "We can if we do it at the right time and in the right place," Kakashi snapped, already changing course. "Nobody works smart when they're angry." They veered sharply down into a nearby stream, kicking up its water as they dashed along its shore. The moment they were out of Nagato's direct line of sight, Kakashi gave the order. "Mud, cover yourselves in it now! Suppress your chakra as much as possible." Sasuke hesitated for only a second before following suit. The team dropped to their bellies, smearing themselves with thick layers of earth and grass. Kakashi pressed for them to crawl under a small outcropping of stone and moss. Not only was their chakra suppressed, but their presence was physically immutable at this point, as their bodies sank into the environment like ghosts. The world shook as Nagato closed in on their location. The sheer pressure of his power felt as if it would unearth them all on its own, but they remained motionless, bodies pressed into the mud and water. For what felt like an eternity, Nagato hovered above, scanning, searching, sensing. The stream seeped through their clothes, wafting over their faces, interrupting what little breathing was happening right now, and just chilling them to the bone. And then a silence that felt yet more dangerous. A gust of wind and the faint shift in its direction. Nagato was gone. Had he moved on to a new spot to search, or had he entirely given up? They waited, unmoving, for what felt like hours before Kakashi finally whispered, "We live to fight another day." Sasuke exhaled slowly, barely daring to believe it. "Impressive," Minato nodded to their story. "You never fail me with your quick thinking, Kakashi." "Thank you, Sensei." Kakashi nodded, though no grin was visible through his mask. "But there's more." Eyebrows raised at the news, Minato raised a beckoning hand, offering for them to continue. Days passed as they carefully wove their way to the Land of Rain's border, still suspicious that Nagato was hiding just out of sight and waiting for them to reveal themselves. As they reached the Land of Fire's border, the team stumbled across a skirmish in progress. 3 bald men, the same ominous and recurring presence through the last several years, were locked in combat with a solitary figure cloaked in heavy robes. Even at a glance, it was clear both sides were utterly exhausted. Their movements had dulled, and the fight had devolved into sluggish yet desperate taijutsu. "They just never stop," Sasuke muttered, eyes narrowing. "Strange," Kakashi murmured. "Based on reports, they don't go after random people. There's always an intent, a goal in their mind. I wonder who that is that they're fighting." Before they could intervene, the lone fighter shifted, striking with a sudden ferocity. In a sudden surge of chakra, the person let slip an enormous fireball that consumed two of the bald men entirely, leaving behind burned, lifeless husks of what was. Might Guy was the first to dash forward, intercepting the third opponent with a swift kick that sent him sprawling. This battle was over before it began, and as the dust settled, the lone warrior staggered back, panting, before going up in a puff of smoke, replaced by a woman. A flicker of motion, her hood slipped, Sasuke's breath caught as he locked eyes with her. A flash of red, Tomo spinning, Sharingan. Time seemed to slow. A million questions formed in an instant, his mind racing. But before he could speak, she moved. A couple wrapped balls hit the ground around them. Smoke bombs. A thick veil of smoke swallowed her form, and just like that, she was gone. "You are sure you saw the Sharingan?" Minato asked, leaning forward, renewed interest. "Yes, sir," Sasuke nodded with certainty. "I would not cling to a false hope. Those were the eyes of my clan." "Are you suggesting she was a part of your clan?" Minato continued. "Akane apparently generated several sets, so it's difficult to know." Sasuke trailed off in uncertainty. "I just don't have enough information." Leaning back thoughtfully, Minato made a deliberation. "We don't have enough manpower to track down lone shinobi, but this isn't something we'll forget. If she resurfaces, I'll want to know." The weight of failure was heavier than the journey home. The three remaining members of the mission, Sakura, Shizune, and Kabuto, walked through the streets of Konoha with a grim silence between them. Unlike the celebratory hum of the Chunin exams filling the air, their return home bore no triumph. Tsunade was gone. Sakura kept her gaze forward. Her fists remained clenched at her sides. Even though they were already back within the safety of the village, she just couldn't shake the weight pressing against her chest. She had replayed the moment in her head countless times. Every second of that mission burned into memory, every possible outcome she could have controlled. Shizune walked beside her, her usual warmth dimmed, face hollow with unspoken grief. Kabuto, however, strode ahead with purpose rather than sorrow. His posture was stiff, but there was no hesitation in his step. Sakura swallowed hard. They didn't know whether Tsunade was alive or dead. All they knew was that she had been taken. That had been the only thing keeping the smallest ember of hope alive, because if there was even a chance... "Do we just, say it outright?" Sakura finally asked, her voice hoarse. Shizune took a long breath, keeping her eyes forward. "We tell Lord Forth what we saw. Everything. There's no way he'll just limp away from this loss and let Orochimaru keep her." "No way." Shizune answered with a start of fervor, but ended with sadness in her voice as she relived the sight and realized she may never see her lifelong teacher again. Kabuto remained silent. He hadn't said much since they escaped, caught in his own web of thoughts. Nothing Sakura or Shizune said seemed to shake him from his deepening frustration with the circumstances. Now more than ever, Kabuto was not in a mood to speak. As they reached the Hokage building, Sakura felt her stomach twist. Lady Tsunade was never a teacher to Minato, but the Sannin were all three incredibly important to the village as both political advisors and military might. There were few in the world that could match the Sannin together. And it wasn't just the burden of delivering the news, it was knowing that Lord Namikaze was a student to Jiraiya, the only Sannin that might be left. It would be like losing an aunt to him. As terrifying as the prospect was for Sakura, it must have been gut-wrenching to Shizune and Kabuto, never mind Lord Forth and Lord Jiraiya. The moment they stepped into the Hokage's office, Minato's distracted gaze redirected onto them. His paperwork was in a mess around him, but he looked deeper in thought prior to their entry. His usual calmness hardened into something heavy, something unreadable, when he registered the look on their faces. Sakura's throat felt like it was closing as she stared helplessly at the Hokage. She could barely tear her eyes away from him to glance at Shizune and Kabuto, who both looked equally flummoxed that they couldn't talk. Indeed, This was heavy news. His gaze felt sharper than ever. "Where is she?" Minato asked, his voice quiet but firm. He already knew, as if he stole the memories right from their minds. Sakura did not think she would ever have to deliver news quite so terrible like this. She glanced at Shizune, who grew more pale by the moment, paralyzed by the notion that she might have to acknowledge it aloud. Kabuto seemed ready, but he was sweating profusely. She could see his Adam's apple rise and fall as he swallowed repeatedly, and his eyes were blinking quickly. He was panicking. Such a strange development. They could behold Orochimaru's presence and see what they saw, the evils and the terrors that would be implied. But they couldn't tell their leader, their strongest ally, this one piece of bad news. Sakura started, but already the word caught in her throat. "We failed, Lord Hokage. Lady Tsunade has been taken." A silence thicker than steel filled the room again. Minato's fingers twitched slightly before relaxing, and he sighed before straightening and standing from his chair. His gaze flickered towards Shizune, then Kabuto, searching for some contradiction, some sign that this wasn't as bad as it sounded. But the silence stretched. No one corrected Sakura. Minato inhaled sharply, closing his eyes for a brief moment before he leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "Tell me everything." Sakura and later Shizune recounted their mission, detailing Orochimaru's altered demeanor and the battle that led to Tsunade's capture and their forced retreat. They spoke of the Sound 3, Dosu, and of Jugo. The Sound has become a village of elites and no apparent army. If marched upon, they would most likely fall. But if left to their own devices, they would carve out whatever control they wanted. Minato remained expressionless throughout the report, but his knuckles had turned white from the way his hands gripped the desk. They detailed how even his lackeys were not to be trifled with. When they finished, Minato let out a slow, measured breath. "I see." A moment of silence followed again. Sakura was thankful for the ticking of the clock, because absolute silence would have driven her mad by now. Suddenly finding his voice, Kabuto burst out, "Lord Hokage, I request a private audience." Minato glanced at Kabuto with a measured deliberation. The sharpness of his blue eyes that were normally inviting were now oddly intimidating. Why? Kabuto looked tense. "Because I know how to solve this problem, but it would be difficult to hear." Shizune stiffened beside Sakura. "What does that mean?" Minato studied Kabuto for a long moment, his gaze drilling into him. Whatever he saw in that man's expression made his lips press into a thin line. "You don't think they can handle it?" Kabuto shifted and looked at the girls. "I think they can. But you?" Comprehensive, Minato nodded. "Shizune, Sakura, you may go." Sakura wanted to protest. She wanted to demand an answer from Kabuto, to tell Minato that whatever this was, they would obviously need to hear it too. But Minato's tone left no room for argument. Shizune pulled Sakura to follow her out, giving a small shake of her head, a silent plea. Not now. Gritting her teeth, Sakura turned on her heel and left the room alongside Shizune, but not before shooting one last glance at Kabuto. He didn't look bad. In fact, he was kind of like a statue, staring at the floor in front of Lord Hokage's desk. And thus, the door shut, leaving them alienated from any further conversation. The streets were alive with the rhythmic pulse of Konoha's heart. Shopkeepers called out their latest wares, enticing customers with fresh produce and rare shinobi tools, while children darted through the crowds, playing an impromptu game of tag that sent startled civilians stepping aside with laughter. The scent of sizzling barbecue and fresh ramen drifted from the food stalls, mingling with the comfortable summer air, as a group of chunin off-duty shared a round of rice wine, their raucous stories spilling into the bustling day. Banners strung between buildings swayed gently in the breeze, advertising the day's chunin exams over the village's main thoroughfare. Shinobi of all ranks moved with purpose, some enjoying their well-earned rest, others hurrying to complete last-minute chores before heading off to the stadium. Even the Hokage faces overlooking the lively streets seemed to watch over the village with an air of contentment, as if Konoha itself was breathing in time with the energy of its people. Naruto had grown used to glares, to whispers that followed him like shadows. The change had been slow, but undeniable. Now, those same villagers who once turned their backs on him merely spared him passing glances. Some looked away quickly, others nodded in polite acknowledgement. He wasn't celebrated. Not yet. But he wasn't absolutely hated anymore either. Regardless, it was a win. He had just come from the hospital where Shino had barely acknowledged his own missing arm. The guy was tough. Always had been, but Naruto had seen something in his expression. A quiet determination, something steeled and unwavering. And he wondered why. Why did Shino continue to hang on to such courage, such willpower? And Karin had barely spoken to, well, anybody. Forget Naruto, she was completely withdrawn lately, though she continued to hang out with Shino. Naruto didn't pry into her change of attitude because, frankly, he just didn't know her that well. But something felt off, something he couldn't shake. But those thoughts were pushed aside as he continued toward the stadium for Phase 3 of the Chunin exams. Unlike his run through the Chunin exams, the matches weren't announced this time. Naruto had no idea what was to come, and the Chunin exams were bringing in people from all over the nation. No Uzumaki clan this time, but practically every single lesser clan that Naruto had ever heard of was showing up, because only Leaf Ninja passed Phase 2. And so, the other nations that were involved packed up and left already. It was so rarely a Leaf-only event, it made it feel more inviting, more safe. He glanced up while walking, catching the sight of the massive stone faces of the Hokage monument looming in the distance. He wondered now about the third Hokage, to put up his life to protect not just the village, but Naruto and his parents. He wondered what kind of circumstances had to occur for him to be willing to do the same. A grin tugged at his lips. He might not have everyone's respect yet, but this was something to aspire for. He wanted to find that reason, that motive to protect the village beyond guarding the innocent souls, because Konoha was more than something as black and white as that. He would find the answer. The weight in Sakura's chest hadn't lightened, but she forced herself to breathe as she neared the stadium. She was a little late, and already the crowds were so intense that she couldn't even get to the stadium. The roar of conversation and excitement washed over her, so many people talking all at once. It was nearly white noise. She could fake the excitement. In the end, she might have to. After several minutes without moving a single step, Sakura leapt free from the crowd into a nearby triplicate of trees. She knew the crowd would thin in time, but all the noise kept her anxious and she just wanted to sit down and relax. Leaping to the stadium's outer wall, she ran up its side for an easy entry. It was not like she needed a ticket to get in. Heck, it was a free show for the locals anyway. Clearing its top edge, Sakura landed down below amongst the familiar seating and debated on where she would sit until she saw a raised hand waving at her. Down at the very front, Naruto sat and her chest warmed. Beside him was Tenten and behind was Shikamaru. Both turned to see her arrival. Grinning eagerly, Naruto called out to her. His energy was almost contagious, and for a moment, she almost let herself believe she could match it. Almost. "Took you long enough?" Naruto grinned, patting the empty seat beside him. "Come on, you were about to miss it. The first two combatants just came out." "Who?" Sakura asked curiously, leaning forward, only for Shikamaru to answer. "First round is Hanabi Hyuga versus Konohamaru Sarutobi." Rolling her eyes and shaking her head, Sakura leaned back again. "Sorry to say, Shikamaru, but the Hyuga clan just keeps pushing out prodigies. Your little protege doesn't stand a chance." "I wouldn't be so sure," Shikamaru smiled, closing his eyes with some assurance. "Who of the Hyuga clan stands amongst us as Chunin or Jonin yet?" "I agree with you, Sakura," Tenten poked in. Hanabi has this in the bag. Every time I see that little stinker, he's causing trouble more than training. But can't you see it? Naruto whispered, looking down at the stadium. From their distance, it was impossible to see, but Naruto felt a shiver of excitement. I get the same feelings from Konohamaru as I do from Asuma-sensei. Well, they are related, Tenten added, laughing at her own implication that Naruto didn't know that. I wonder, is this what it was like to stand before the third Hokage? Naruto muttered in awe as he peeked down at the fighters, listening to the proctor's instructions. He let out a shaky breath, excited to see what the two could bring to the fight. Because he was a Sarutobi too. I wonder if this is how people feel with my dad. He muttered nearly into voicelessness as he stared wide-eyed at the battle below. I wonder, will I ever shine like that? Settling down on Sakura's other side, Sasuke had arrived. He didn't gawk over the ledge like Naruto was, and instead remained composed as they waited for the fight to actually start. His gaze danced between the rest of his class, hovering on Naruto's contorted form, leaning over the edge for a second longer. Sit back, Sasuke said, blinking and shaking his head. There's no question here. Hanabi's winning it. Bet, Naruto answered back, whipping his head around at Sasuke. Loser sharpens the other's tools for the next 3 missions. Loser pays for 6 meals. Sasuke raised the stakes, a small smirk suddenly betraying him. Standing from his seat and leaning towards Sasuke, Naruto threw a fast palm, clapping it into Sasuke's. Deal! Now, both approached the banister overlooking the fight and paid special attention to what was happening now. Tenten and Shikamaru had engaged in their own conversation by this point, debating the match's outcome. The Byakugan is no joke, and they say she's got it stronger than Hinata, Tenten pointed out. And her technique is supposedly unmatched against anyone her age. He's a year older than her, Shikamaru corrected cheekily. Most of Konohamaru's tricks he keeps hidden from everyone. He acts a fool, but if she actually pushes him, we might see those tricks. Sakura managed a small smile, shuffling in her seat as the conversations shifted naturally around her. It was refreshing, a moment of normalcy after everything that had happened. But had she deserved to feel normal now? Wherever Lady Tsunade was, if she was still alive, Sakura could not bear to think about it. But it was the only thing on her mind. Hey, you okay? Naruto's voice cut through, quieter than usual. He had stopped his immature goofing around now, as his focus centered on her. She could hear the fight breaking out below, but her well-being was paramount to him. Warming in the cheeks, Sakura let out a sudden breath. I'm fine, I'm just tired. Long mission. Naruto tilted his head and squinted slightly. You don't have to tell me. Whatever disaster struck, it's not your fault. I heard you were sent out with Tsunade. She might be super old, but she's also super strong. That must have been something, seeing her being serious. I'm used to her being so much more casual. Same with Jiraiya, actually. I take them for granted, but they're like the strongest ninja in the village, next to my dad. It's crazy to think that the people we feel comfortable around here, at home, can be so powerful outside on missions. In fact, when I was out on my mission, Naruto... Sakura stopped him, as he had nearly began to rant. Naruto, I'm okay. Thank you for the encouragement. You're right. There was nothing I could have done to upend that disaster. You don't even have to smile, Naruto offered. But it's a good day for us all. Might as well make the most of it, right? Yeah, Sakura chuckled, trailing off. As Naruto turned his attention back toward the match, Sakura saw that Sasuke had been staring right at her that whole time. When her eyes met his, he nodded quickly and glanced back down at the fighting. Naruto immediately started booing and cheering in turn as the balance of the fight teetered in both directions. Shikamaru grunted in amazement. They've been fighting for nearly 7 minutes non-stop. What? Tenten answered, shocked. Wow, this might be closer than I thought. I couldn't even tell that 7 minutes had passed. It's all so riveting. That is an atrocious suggestion, Minato exclaimed angrily at Kabuto. The two had been in conversation from the moment Sakura and Shizune left the room, and Kabuto's lead-in to his suggestions went from bad to worse. I suggest that you take some time to figure out who it is that you think you're aligned to. If you were a true Leaf Shinobi, you wouldn't ever suggest such a malevolent solution to this problem. Lord Hokage, we all need to step into the line of fire sometimes, Kabuto argued, attempting to defend his decisions. A small loss for a great win. It's the ultimate in strategy. Kabuto, Minato muttered with monotonous finality. It would be a smart decision to leave this office and not incur any further trouble. Lord Fourth, please, Kabuto begged. I don't suggest this with a light heart. I understand the implications and the ramifications, but she's the head doctor of the entire known world. Can we afford to lose her? No cost is too great. Yours is too great, Minato seethed with poisonous tone. Leave. Forced to give up, Kabuto's shoulders slumped, and he slowly walked out of the room, rejected. Minato's teeth audibly grinded in his frustration at Kabuto's most heinous suggestion. And now, of all times, he was expected to show a kind face and preside over the Chunin exams. Taking a very deep breath, Minato shook his head of the thoughts. In a yellow flash, he's seated above the stands, looking down at the unfolding fight. He glances at the two combatants currently fighting, and his brows furl in confusion. Why hasn't Hanabi won yet? That's it for today's episode. Ooh, even more fun with this shorty of an episode. Like I said at the start, I had some major writer's block, so I couldn't brandish the length that I usually do, and apologies for that. But it's just one of those things that we can't necessarily help, and I didn't want to skip out on doing an episode. Today's is just incredibly condensed. I kept in all of the important bits, but left out some world building that can essentially fit into any episode. There was a lot to do with the goings-on of the Chunin exams that I was going to cover, a sort of behind the scenes, if you will. It wasn't going to be anything integral to the plot. Just something to make the world feel more lived in. We got a proper closeout to the 3 missions, technically 4 if you want to include the ultimate fate of the Scroll Seekers. We got villains on all sides growing annoyed with the Leaf, in addition to their own antics growing closer to execution. I look forward to how everyone likes what's coming next. Hopefully the change of pace will lift my writer's block, but if it doesn't, let me know if you're okay with a shorty like this, or if you'd rather wait a week for a longer episode. Just for future notice if this happens again. I think so far I've only had writer's block twice, so this hasn't been a devastating problem. I'm sick more than I have writer's block, and I'm not sick very often. Although right now, I do actually have a sore throat and writer's block, so what are the chances? Without further ado, meet me in the Discord and fire off your questions and theories. The sky's the limit.